Hey, I'm Dr. Pilet. Welcome to Interventions and our 12-session anger management program. You know, I'm very proud of our program. It was written when I was working on my PhD in researching the experience of intense emotions. You know, the program was so successful that in fact we published it, and now this is the program that you're about to attend. Every week you'll be coming to an hour and 15-minute session, and if in fact it's appropriate, you can expedite, and that is the 12-week program. 12 sessions can be moved up to 6 weeks. Typically we don't like to see that, but when we have the judicial system, a case manager requesting that, we can do that. Okay. While you're here at orientation, you'll be issued a copy of the book, How to Control Anger Before It Controls You. This is available on the internet, Amazon.com. Part of your orientation fee, you'll get a copy of this. It's divided into 21 chapters. We'll be using it during the program. Very good curriculum. However, you'll also be getting this folder here. It's got the individual 12 classes you are attending, and they're listed by topic. Please understand, when you start, you may be starting in the middle. You won't be at class 1. We only start class 1 every 12 sessions. But we repeat enough information during that class that you won't be handicapped and that it'll all make sense to you. Let me give you an idea of some of the topics you're going to be going through. The beginning of our program is understanding the experience of intense emotions. That will be lesson 1. And we'll be talking about and defining what is suppressed, what is expressed, what is controlled anger. A lot of people misunderstand the idea of anger control, and they'll make a statement that says something like this: hey doc, you know, I was so close to losing it, but I controlled my anger. And they are talking about when they took a time out, that they didn't experience an intense emotion by hitting, pushing, or shoving another person. But understand that that's not anger control. That's the control of the expression of anger. And when we do that, when we walk away, and we didn't do that hit, strike, or punch, we just suppressed it. Suppressed it. Suppressed anger is in fact all that information, all those incidents, we call them scorecard topics, if you will, all those things that I hold inside of me. They could be people, topics, or situations, but they're all negative, and I hold them inside of me, and because I'm an avoider or an accommodator, I just want to make you happy, I tend to not problem solve. And so when we see people that don't get involved in problem solving and they suppress, what I like to point out to is eventually that suppression is like a balloon that's blowing up. It's and if every day you suppress a little bit more, then eventually, you know, things explode. And I say those things that I can't believe I said. I did those things that I can't believe I did. So we talked about suppressed anger, anger control, which is the idea that I problem solve. Anger control is equal to problem solving. If you're not solving the problem and you're just taking a time out, that's the suppression of anger. And then finally, to some extent, I've mentioned a little bit about the experience of anger, which is expressed anger, which is, of course, hit, strike, or punch. But also, a lot of people don't realize that we tend to radiate intense emotions through our facial expressions and our body language. And so when I rate a person on their communications of anger, only 4% of the meaning of the expression of anger is in the words I use. 37% is, in fact, my tone of my voice and how I say the words. And the greater part, about 54%, is my facial expressions and my body language. So when we talk about this idea of anger, and I give you this formula, just understand that the expression of anger is typically only 4% in the words, and everything else is facial expression and body language. That's class number 1. Class 2, we're looking at what are your risk factors. What are the risk factors? Remember that balloon that's blowing up? When people have high risk factors, they typically have lots of scorecard items, the list of things I've never forgiven you for, and I'm building up that pressure internal to myself. Also, as a precipitating event to that notion of scorecard items is stress. Research has shown over and over again that stress is the one factor that tends to put people into overwhelm. I'm sure you've heard the expression about going postal. My God, they lost control, they went postal. Well, the term going postal is directly related to an incident that occurred in the 70s where a postal worker went in and killed a number of innocent people. But that person's stress level was so high, they became so reactive, they did something totally unthinkable. Well, that term, going postal, stuck. Why? Because the post office busiest time of the year is during the holiday season. And the one time we should be taking a break and relaxing, well, guess what? That's the highest work pressure of the year. going postal. So in our second session, we're going to look at topics, those topics that tend to set me off. Sometimes I call those landmines. People. I get along with almost everybody, but there's some people, oh my God, I'm very close to losing it. And then situations. You know, as the holiday season comes upon us, we have to realize the situation that's developing is, wow, I'm with my relatives. Maybe I don't even get along with them. Or I have to go to an office party. The situation that precipitates me being around a person and a topic tends to be negative. And that's finally the last part of that class, which we call anticipated negative events. Have you ever found that sometimes just thinking about something bad to happen is enough to get you ready for it to happen, that even when it doesn't happen, you've ruined your day. It's ruined your experience. I call that peeing in your swimming pool. It's kind of a humorous joke that I made about my kids are always in the back swimming. Nobody ever uses the bathroom. And I'll say, God dang it, I got a pee meter in the back and it's going off because somebody peed in the swimming pool. But the idea that you take your personal environment and you degrade your own personal environment through negative anticipation. Negative anticipation is not a good thing. Why? Because even when it doesn't happen, you're not happier. You just felt like you missed a bullet. So the last part of that class has to do with anticipated negative events, and do in fact you have them. As you move into class 3, it's the first time that we're really getting into stress. Every study I've seen has shown that stress is the one factor that is the thing that will put a person into overwhelm. Remember overwhelm? I call that crisis. You can be stressed, but you're in crisis when you reach that point. You don't feel like you can deal with it. You've had enough. And when we get into crisis, we're at that issue where I don't give a damn. I don't care anymore. I don't care what I say. And if you will, there's an old saying about 50 years of good living can be destroyed by 10 seconds of stupidity. You know, that's what we're getting into, that idea of stress. So I want you to learn that there's negative stress and positive stress, what they each look like. I want you to understand that negative stress erodes us, decays us, but positive stress, that's the thing we need to keep doing. A lot of times when I work with couples that are in troubled relationships, it's not the things that they quit doing, it's the things that they quit doing that are a problem, because sometimes they're a source of positive stress. I like this expression, if you will. I said this a few years ago, and I've coined it ever since. And I can live in hell for a month if I know why, but I can't make it for a day unless I have a reason. See, that's what stress does to you. It erodes you and decays your positive outlook. When our stress gets too high, we tend to reduce in our tolerance level, our ability to tolerate. We become more reactive, and with that, we tend to make the worst out of bad situations. You'll hear me during the course of this program say something like, any idiot can make a bad situation worse, but it takes skill to make one better. Kind of that's what I want you to be with this idea of stress. As we get into session 4, I call that getting a grip of long-term and short-term stress, which is just to recognize that every day that you lead your life, there's things that are short-term. They last an hour, they last 40 minutes, they last 30 minutes, and it's the bad weather while I'm driving to work and I got to pull over and stop for a while. Short-term stress. It's the flat tire that only was there until I fixed it, but once it's fixed and I'm on the road again, it's gone. So this notion that we have short-term stress, just to recognize that during the day your short-term stress is up and down. But long-term stress, that's a different problem. Long-term stress has to do with these issues that go over weeks, months, sometimes years. I'm broke, I don't have any money, I can't pay the rent. I'm going through a divorce. I feel like my heart's ripped out of my chest. My stomach's in knots. My children are sick. Long-term stress. But there, the idea is your long-term stress, which is what you wake up to every day, can precipitate you into crisis because the short-term stress spikes you over and puts you into another place. Okay? As you go into the next class, now we're talking about handling tough situations, because I've built this enough to where we've talked about, you know, the different types of anger. We've talked about stress. We've talked about people, topic, situation. Now, what is it that I have in me where I'm radiating this negative energy? So we're going to be talking about criticism, direct criticism, indirect criticism. Remember that notion of facial expressions and body language? You can actually tell somebody to kiss your butt and not say the words. It's just by the way you look at them. We're going to talk a lot about that nonverbal communications, because I have a lot of people that come to my program that are truly introverts. They're not outspoken, they're not loud people, they're quiet people. They tend to go to their room, to their little private space, wherever that is, in their safe home, their place that they've built. That's the environment they truly enjoy. But because they're so introverted, they don't exercise or exert themselves in the world around them, and therefore they tend to communicate more non-verbally, facial expressions and body language. As I get into the next part, which is, I'm getting into class 6, which is conflict styles. You're going to be doing a test that's going to rate you on whether you're a competitor, agitator, avoider, accommodator, collaborator, or compromiser. That test will give you some notions of when a certain topic is around. You tend to respond to it in this way. We're going to give you some tools on what to do when a person's collecting information to prove you're wrong. We call those competitors. Or what to do when your style is to be an avoider, but understand where we said this before. I've mentioned this before. Avoiders get nothing resolved because they don't problem solve. That balloon gets bigger and bigger until it pops. And sometimes we find that an avoider, which is a passive person that tends to hide, will explode into an agitator because they've been pushed so far. As I get you to class 7, now we're dealing with intense emotions. What is it when we are having to deal with intense emotions? Most intense emotions occur when we're in crisis. So that idea that I'm yelling, that I'm screaming, that I'm being highly reactive, we're going to assess of the conflict styles, remember? Competitors, avoiders, suppressed anger, suppressed anger, and expressed anger. We're going to talk to you about what does it look like when you're experiencing this idea. What are the people, what are the topics, what are the situations connected to that? We're going to work through that you understand within yourself that you're being hostile and aggressive. And how do I change my conflict style from the previous class into this particular class, where how am I making better of a bad situation? As you move into class number 8, now we're doing the really in-depth stuff, because now we're doing personality testing. I'm a Myers-Briggs certified person. Myers-Briggs will allow me to test you and put you into a framework that sorts you by temperament. There are 16 temperament styles. Look, this test is not rocket science. It's just a useful tool. And as a useful tool, it may categorize you as being a little bit of an avoider because you tend to be introverted and you tend to be a feeling-based person. But you see, by delineating, are you an extrovert, are you an introvert? By ringing out your personality and finding, in fact, that you tend to be a thinker or a feeler. And as we put these things together, and I print you a 4-page personality chart, well, guess what? All of a sudden, you make sense. The experience of intense emotions, which you have, and how you respond or react to people, topics, and situations begins to come together when I tie to it your personality temperament sorter. With that, I will personalize some of these class materials just to you so that it makes sense with your particular personality and temperament style. As you get to the class number 9, we're getting into this area called social phenomena, and that's class 9, 10, and 11. Class 9, social phenomena, is about active listening. Class 10 is about substance abuse, and class 11 is something we call codependence. So active listening, understanding, I'm going to be teaching you what it is to listen. What's the difference between carrying a conversation and what it is for active listening? We teach you the the listening styles, which are reflective, empathetic, and empathetic reflective. I'm going to give you some exercises on how to listen, teach you why it's called active listening, so that by the time you leave that class, you've got a notion of how to carry a conversation with someone, but fine-tune yourself in that art of listening. I've always been a believer of this, and you're going to find me right as time goes on. Listening is a learned skill, and most of us don't have it. Most of us are taught how to listen, to collect information, to reflect back similar information, but that's a conversation. Here we're going to teach you how to listen. As I go into the next class, we're talking about substance abuse issues. And that is the reflection of all the cases we do. By the vast majority, most of the people that come to my anger management classes had some experience with an altered state. They were drinking beer, they were high, maybe they were smoking cannabis or doing marijuana. Maybe they were on medication for depression. But the idea that when we have these altered states going on, that we are higher risk to get into these things called hot topics, understand. A lot of guys tell me that wine or beer calms them down, and a lot of studies have shown that a glass of wine every night, especially red wine, is really good for you. The problem is that when you have a glass of wine or you drink a beer, now when it lowers my threshold and gives me the ability to talk about something that before I couldn't talk about, that's not good. Because it's not just the beer or the glass of wine. It's typically we've had too much to drink, And now we're using you statements. You statements are those things that I do. I criticize you. I derail you. I say things about you that are negative, not the same as I statements, which is, you know, I love this relationship. I'm looking forward to it at work. My feelings are hurt, and I'm asking you to listen. The difference between that and a you statement is you're insensitive. You never care about anybody but yourself. You're always late. You see the difference, the shift in energy? One is a request for you to do better, to meet my standard, and the other one is a slam dunk because I'm going to tear you apart. As we get into the final 11 and 12, number 11 is codependence. In my book, Love, Lost, and Found, which in fact, you know, is one of our system manuals. I wrote this book in 2003. I've got a whole chapter on codependence. We call it caretaking versus caregiving. Walking the walk with the person is not the same as carrying them. Codependence. I get so involved in the life of another person that I lose my identity. Part of the problem with caretaking is I get so involved in them, I begin to do this thing called enabling. I provide to you the resources that allow you to live above your standard because you don't earn those on your own. Or I rescue, which is your life has turned to such crap that you're out of money and you're out of resources, so I'm going to give you mine. I'm going to give you my car, let you live with me, let you stay with me. You know, part of our problem is, of course, many of us are taught that to be a good friend is to help out. But codependence isn't about helping out. Remember, the idea that you can talk to me about anything, the idea that I'm always there for you, that's different. That's healthy. But when I take responsibility away from you and I solve your life problems, then what's going to happen is that person has less and less success at solving life's problems, and I get more and more involved. Typically, I see men and women that come into my anger management program, and they'll tell me about her or him and why they shouldn't be here, and they get so intense as they describe everything she did or he did that they lose a sense of themselves. I will tell you that's evidence of what we call codependent. That term was coined by Melanie Beattie. There's some wonderful books out there. One in particular is Codependent No More, written 35 years ago, you know, and it's still a good book about how do I get myself back by getting uninvolved in the lives of others. But we're going to teach you about that. Here we have a model called 5 levels of relationships, how acquaintances become friends, how friends become roommates, how roommates become companions, how companions become lovers, sort of a TP. And while you're working in this relationship, you have characteristics, you know, commitment and disclosure. I'm not going to go through all 9 characteristics, but you know, part of this program may be that I help you sort through where am I in this relationship, and am I off track? Am I really getting too involved in the life of another person, so much so that I love myself? When we get to class 12, that's sort of the end of the program for us, because now we're talking about patterns, habits, and relationships. What patterns do you have in your life that tend to expose you to getting too involved in the lives of others? Now you're starting to review everything about not just your conflict style, not just your ability to listen. You're also going to review some of those ideas of substance abuse, the 3 ways that we experience anger, the idea of stress. Now we're bringing it all together, because what I'm looking for is, what are your risk factors? What are your risk factors you leave me that I say, you know, you need to be concerned about this? You know, your stress remains so high that you're very subject to going into crisis. And when that happens, how are you experiencing impulse control? Because remember, anger management is about impulse control. It's about not doing the thing that unfortunately can ruin your life. Remember I said before, 50 years of good living can be screwed up by 10 seconds of stupidity. So we're going to be talking about impulse control, not being reactive, what to do about it. More importantly, the last thing I'm going to talk about is dealing with bozos. If you go to my website, interventionsinc.net, I've got 100 hours of videos. Just like you're looking at this one, I've got videos on the internet as well as on my website. Dealing with bozos. Bozo the clown. When I was a kid, that was a big thing. What happens when you're dealing with somebody that's so disconnected from reality that you have no possibility of getting out of this? How do you identify that ahead of time, and what do you do about it? Okay? Finally, as you end the program, you have an end of course test, which you'll personally do, hand in to me. I'll review those results with you. And then assuming that you've met the criteria, that you've attended the classes, that you've passed every class. Every class has an end of class test. We call it points to ponder. As your participation has been successful, as your end of class individual 12 class tests have been fulfilled, as you've proven to me you've learned what you were supposed to learn, and of course your end of class one final examination, which is about how would you deal with situations now. Then we issue a certificate of completion. I'd like you to know, once you finish my program, you're always welcome to come back to sit in. There's never any charges associated with that. But understand, I work for you and I try to do a good job. Again, I'm Dr. Pilet. Thank you for picking us. Don't forget to get a copy of your book. I look forward to seeing you in class.